Hi, thanks for having me participate, and thank you for taking time to watch this. I want to discuss about this notion that the United States is somehow in decline because of the loss in Afghanistan. Simply not true. I mean, there are parts of the American empire that are in decline, right? You have, internally, economically, there's all real aspects of a continuing worsening state for America, for its empire, as well as for its citizens. The wars of the last 2 decades have been very important. They have not been victories as the men and women who implemented them thought they would be. And they have been outright losses in some ways. Certainly, Taliban victory this summer, the retreat of the Americans, what the world watched happen in Kabul in August of this year, certainly was something that was a defeat for the U.S. The loss of a client state, the loss of the bases in Afghanistan, certainly the humiliation of it. But we have to go and look back at where the United States empire has been heading. The trend is not that it's retreating or it's lessening or that it's getting weaker. People ask, well, what are the lessons from this war in Afghanistan? Will the Americans learn their lessons from this? Will the Americans learn their lessons from this war in Afghanistan? And the lesson has already been learned, and it was learned years back, starting in the second half of the Obama administration. There is a very real effort to change how the United States fights its wars in the Muslim world. And you have to realize, from the west coast of Africa all the way to Pakistan, the United States has been involved in at least 15 different wars, where American troops have been present, killing or being killed. What the United States learned first in the Bush administration with the Iraq War, and then the Obama administration with the escalation of the Afghan war starting in 2009, both those wars were incredibly unpopular, was that these wars can continue as long as they are unseen. So what you have in the Muslim world, in these wars in the Muslim world that the United States is waging, again, from the west coast of Africa to Pakistan, are wars that are run by the American Special Operations and CIA communities. These are wars that are secret wars. Because they're run by the Special Operations and CIA people, they are considered classified. They are legally secret. The United States government actually has an obligation not to talk about them. So as long as these wars are kept hidden, kept away from the American public, kept away from the concerns of Congress, they can continue, and they are continuing. You have to go and look very hard to find information on these wars. Along with the CIA and the special operations people, the United States government is increasingly using drones, because American air power is a key component to these wars, but primarily now, or more and more, it's coming through drones. Drones have a lot of benefit for the American military. One of those being is that they are also secret operations. Any type of drone activity is considered classified. So you have another aspect of these wars run by secret warriors, is that the tools they use are also considered secret. So again, no obligation to talk about these wars, actually an obligation to keep them hidden. Another aspect that keeps these wars hidden is the use of contractors. Many Americans are familiar with the notion that 7,000 U.S. forces were killed in Iraq and Afghanistan. Many less know that 8,000 contractors were killed in these wars. And the important thing about that is that in any previous war, those contractors would have been wearing a military uniform. These are wars that have been outsourced, that have been privatized in many ways. So the true number of American forces killed in Iraq and Afghanistan is not 7,000, but 15,000, because you have to include those 8,000 contractors. Now, this is something that keeps the cost of the war hidden, right? The other thing too is contractors don't have the same level of oversight or control on them by the American media, by the American public, by the American Congress. Case in point, an organization called a company called CACI, CACI. It was in Iraq working for the United States government. It was torturing people on behalf of the United States government. Or the survivors of the torture sued this American company in a U.S. court. And the U.S. court said, since this happened in a sovereign country, that whole idea of Iraq being sovereign, when it was occupied, quite silly, of course. But nevertheless, the United States court says that because this torture happened in a sovereign court, the United States court has no jurisdiction over this company, CACI. So with contractors, you not only have the hidden costs, right? They don't count. Their deaths don't count. Their wounds don't count. You also have a way for the government to do something that it couldn't do otherwise or couldn't get away with. So American government can have an American company go and torture people on its behalf, and there are no consequences for it, right? There's no oversight on that. And the other aspect about these wars is that proxies are used. So the proxies are either government or militia. They are the ones who bear the brunt of the fighting. They are the ones who absorb the cost of these wars. So it is not a cost that is noticed by the American public because it's Black people killing Black people, brown people killing brown people. The American press does not concern itself with it that very much. Since the American press is not reporting on it, the American public doesn't notice it. And since the American public is not noticing it, the American Congress doesn't seem to really care too much about it. Keeps the wars hidden. I will note one other thing about this use of proxies. Oftentimes it's combined with a divide and conquer strategy. That's why you see these civil wars all throughout these nations. This is a divide and conquer strategy, something the Americans learned from the British. The British employed this all over the world in their empire, certainly used it against the Native Americans, before the United States came to be. So the United States, throughout its history, has used divide and conquer strategies in support of its empire all across the globe. So you have these hidden wars in the Muslim world that fall underneath the CIA and the special operations people. So you can imagine they are happy, the CIA and special operations people. The wars continue. Very little is spoken about them. On the other side, what you hear more about, though, is Russia and China. And as the special operations and CIA people got their wars in the Muslim world, their enemy is the Muslims, the army gets the Russians. And, want to not, I could be here all day talking about this, but I'll try and keep it as brief as possible. With the Russians, you can have large armies in Europe. You can have large land armies. You can have very heavy land armies that require tanks and artillery and other armored vehicles, right? In the past few years, the United States has added 2 brigades of armored vehicles to its army. Without an enemy like Russia, you can't justify that. So that allows the purchase of thousands of more tanks, artillery pieces, other armored types of vehicles that without that threat, right? Without the idea that we have to be in Europe, the United States has to be in Europe to defend Europe from the Russians, it's simply not possible. You also get into the aspects of the individuals in the institution itself, where so many of these American generals of the United States Army became officers during the Cold War. And so they were brought up with the idea, the fantasy, if you will, of fighting a major land war in Europe. They want the same glory that the American generals got from World War II and to a lesser extent World War I. I mean, these individual concerns are very important, just as much as the institutional concerns and the budget concerns and everything else. The individual concerns about legacy and the fantasy of, not just legacy, but career progression. For a CIA or special operations person right now, they can spend their whole career at war. doing their job, plying their trade, right, at every level of their career. That's a very exciting thing for them. You know, in the same case that the Army generals fantasized about this great war, this great land war in Europe, just as their predecessors had before them with the First and Second World Wars, the Navy wants the same in the Pacific. And in order for the Navy to justify $13 billion aircraft carriers and $10 billion submarines, it needs to have an enemy like China. You know, one of the things that we see with the Afghan war and with the Iraq war before that was that huge amount of resources for the conventional Army and Navy and Air Force and the Marine Corps too was tied up in these wars. And it wasn't meeting the aspirations of either the individuals leaving these institutions or leading these institutions or the institutions themselves. Afghanistan and Iraq was no way to make sure that you got a new aircraft carrier that was $13 billion, let alone 7 or 8 of them like they planned to build, right? Or a whole or entire brigades of new tanks. There is no way to justify that with either of those wars. So, you know, let alone the manpower commitment. You know, the fact that the services felt that they were burdened by these wars. You know, this is not the wars they wanted, with the exception of a few commanders like General Petraeus and McChrystal that were really outliers. Most of the Army generals, and especially the Air Force and Navy generals, they want the wars that they want. So the Navy gets that. Army gets that with Russia. The Navy gets that with China. You know, and the Air Force, you know, for the most part, needs China, but also is happy to have Russia as well. So the Air Force kind of can do both, because you need enemies like Russia or China to justify the next bomber plane the Air Force plans on buying, which is the B-21, which is going to cost about $500 million a plane. And, you know, you need to have an adversary, you need to have an enemy like, you know, like Russia or China justify all that. You know, there's other aspects of the American empire and the military that are, you know, adjusting as well, that have been for years. The U.S. Marine Corps, you know, again, what's best for the institution? What are the leaders fantasize about? Well, the U.S. Marine Corps, you know, has ideas of going back again to the glories of the Second World War, that they're going to seize islands. Of course, who's the enemy for that is China. So they're adjusting for that. You have what's, you know, U.S. Space Command now. And again, you know, so what you have along with the Cyber Command, and that leads into the interesting aspects of hybrid warfare, you know, whether it be satellites or computers, the use of information technology, either through public propaganda operations, or by seizing and controlling critical infrastructure through computers, right? You know, that's a very important aspect of modern warfare. I mean, it's called hybrid warfare. You know, in that it's ongoing, it's continuous, it's occurring even though there aren't bullets being fired. So what you see, if you understand the American empire like I do, is a delegation, a dividing up of the world in terms of enemies, and then assigning aspects or certain roles to parts of the Pentagon for each of those enemies. In this way, everybody in the Pentagon gets what they want. So even though Afghanistan is a loss, even though the United States loses, a client government loses those key air bases, you know, and those were, so it really was a loss. You still see, and you still understand that, well, you know, the direction the American empire was heading, yeah, certainly the American empire and the Pentagon and the White House and State Department, CIA, which would be certainly want to have Afghanistan in their control. But in terms of the trend, in terms of how it was structuring, it has been structuring itself, the enemies it wants to fight, it doesn't need Afghanistan. Afghanistan can become just like one of the other, you know, dozen wars the CIA and special operations are involved with. Okay. I mean, it fits right into all the wars that exist in the Middle East and in Africa now. There's not a large U.S. troop presence. And even in the last bunch of years, I don't know if you would characterize it as being a large troop presence there, but there were American troops. Now it's part of this CIA special operation hidden war in the Muslim world. The Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marine Corps, they don't have to worry about Afghanistan anymore. They don't have to provide troop commitments to it. It doesn't take up any resources, it doesn't take time and energy from them, and they can focus on the enemies they want. And I think understanding that lets you understand how Japan factors into all this, how Japan is a part of the American strategy. The Japanese are viewed by the Americans as, of course, as an ally, but really as a tool, as one piece, in the toolkit to use against who are America's, particularly against China. And that should be very worrisome. Certainly the pressures that you all have in your country about building up and expanding your military, about allowing your military to be more interventionist and aggression, the use of China as a great threat that Japan must respond to. I think everyone has to recognize and understand, how does Japan, though, fit into the American empire, how it fits into the purposes of the various organs of the American empire, the U.S. Army, the U.S. Navy, et cetera, and what that means for, for the Japanese government, Japanese military, and the Japanese people. I will leave it at that, and hopefully I will be joining you guys in question and answer, and we can discuss this further then. But thank you so much for allowing me to participate and for having me with you all.